on the largest transaction that has been struck in the financial services space, and HDFC Credila goes for $1.3 billion to a consortium of private equity investors. And we have ChrysCapital with us, which has infused $250 million in this transaction. Sanjay Kukreja, CIO and partner at ChrysCapital, joining us now. Sanjay, always a pleasure speaking to you. Just last week, we were discussing on Big Deal about your focus on control transactions as well as financial services space. And this is a large transaction that you have struck. But I must also congratulate you that this is the second time that you have taken the benefit and the opportunity of buying out a stake or a company because of a company's group's merger plans and therefore the required divestment. But valuations and the factors that drove that, because Street is of the view that it is an expensive deal for you.
Thank you for having me here. Always a pleasure to speak to you. And really appreciate the opportunity to present our view here. Look, financial services, we believe is in a great space right now. I talked about it earlier also when we spoke. If you just think about the macro cycle that's playing out in India, we're very optimistic on financial services, and partly because if you see the health of corporate India, it's actually never been sort of better in terms of how under leveraged the balance sheet is. If you recall back in 2007-8 global financial crisis, the Western world went through a dark moment, right, where there was bailouts and all of that, which never arrived in India. And India has been going through a deleveraging cycle, a very long deleveraging cycle, starting from 2008. Maybe all the way up to 2020. And so while corporate balance sheets are in very good shape, retail ended up in some other problems, right, related to COVID, related to ILFS and all of that. And which led us as ChrysCapital to actually step back from financial services a little bit in 2020-21. We focused a lot more on digital new age businesses at that time because we felt the COVID issue may prevail, and you may have issues in lending financials. So we actually slowed down and took a backseat a little bit in financial services in the 2000 to 2022 period. But now, as that whole cycle has settled, even the retail loans actually are doing really well. Collections are at all-time highs. We're seeing that play out. And frankly, the profitability of NBFCs, banks is actually, in a state where it's actually increasing at a rapid rate, both on net income level, but also lowering of credit costs over time. And I think that really creates a real opportunity, a super cycle here over the next 3-4 years where profitability is likely to grow very fast. And I'm not just specifically talking about Credila, I'm talking in general about financial services.
That's right. Financial services has been the darling, Sanjay, but specifically about Credila. How do you see this? And are you going to retain the brand HDFC as well in it? Or are you going to change it?
Right. So just coming back to, first on Credila itself, I think it's a very interesting, very differentiated business model. The company is only in, education loans or student loans for people going overseas, and to some extent in India as well, but largely overseas. And that is a very differentiated proposition that not everybody can do. Frankly, they're a leader, in that space by a distance, right? And so it's a really marquee asset in that sense. And if you think about the moats in the business, it's not that easy to lend to someone who's actually likely to go overseas. And then, how do you collect and how do you manage that? So the underwriting capabilities developed by the team here, back to the Bora brothers earlier, as well as HDFC, and the capabilities that they've built here is really, really marquee and differentiated. And that's really what we are valuing as a high quality asset. I think in financial services, our belief has always been to back some of the highest quality assets out there. And I think we're doubling down on that thesis. And therefore, valuation, while is punchy, I think we have long legs of growth here. Because if you think of education and amount of spend on education, is actually replacing marriage to be the single largest, ticket item that an Indian family ever spends on, right? And particularly colleges and overseas. spending related to that. So it's a very big opportunity, one that's increasing. And
Yes.
within that piece, I think Credila, of course, is very, very uniquely differentiated. So we feel while we are paying up, when we recognize that, I think the opportunity to compound on that for a long period of time is very strong, and that's what we are banking.
All right, so moat when it comes to collections and recovery, as well as you're getting a play into the education space. But Sanjay, HDFC brand, is that going to be retained? Will it make any difference if it is not from the house of such a large financial services group and owned by the private equity?
So, of course, I think there is going to be a transition involved, right? And there will be many elements to the transition, right? From HDFC ownership to a private equity ownership. And it will have some implications, that lenders will take a look at. Other, people who are borrowing will have to sort of, take cognizance of, right? But I think what we'll do is obviously ensure everybody that there is business as usual from a business perspective, or, and just the ownership is just going to be as long-term oriented, as was the case earlier. And we're just really interested in compounding this business for a long time. And in fact, there's going to be fresh infusion of capital, which you may have, got hold of. But we are actually putting another 2,000 crores into the business's primary infusion to be able to further grow on this opportunity, right? So we're not worried with the name change. Having said that, we will make all the necessary, precautions and announcements and all of that that's needed in times to come to make sure that there's a smooth transition of ownership that plays out.
That's right.
I'm not going to specifically comment on the brand name itself, but I think the overall narrative of a transition will definitely play out.
Right. So, Sanjay, very quickly, we are running out of time. A few important housekeeping questions on the transaction. The non-compete, has it been signed with HDFC? What about the 10% stake? Are you going to buy that? Do you have a right of first refusal on that? And the management and board positions with the two controlling private equity players?
So look, I think HDFC will have a continuing shareholding of about 10%. And therefore, the board ownership and everything that links to that will, reflect the control of the entity, right? So Barings and ChrysCapital will have board control in that sense, and HDFC will have, one seat, and you'll have a seat from the management as well, right? So there is a whole, a board package that will reflect the ownership that will play out. I am not at liberty to comment on the non-compete and other things which we have, not disclosed. So I will not be able to talk about that. But I think overall, clearly this is a change in control here, and therefore, the board positions will reflect that.
All right. So, Sanjay, got some details, and I'm sure the exit opportunities, whether there's an IPO and how HDFC really exits, will all be seen in times to come. But many congratulations. You're one of the few private equity players which is still investing. Last was Lenskart last week, and this time it's HDFC Credila. Thank you so much for joining us on CNBC TV18. It's over to my colleague, Ekta.
Thanks, Nisha, for that.